So let's follow up with Peace Now. After what we've said in the previous set of slides, we're going to be looking here at the time period 87-1993. And we're going to do that by looking at the political images that Peace Now promoted in this period. And this set of slides and the images that you see, you can find them in the article of John Simons, Promoting Peace, Peace Now as a Graphic Peace Movement, published on Quest in July 2013. So, according to John Simons, there are three main political images of peace that Peace Now promoted in this period of time. And these three images are not necessarily coherent one with the other. In fact, they can be considered quite contradictory, and we shall see how. So the first image is peace as negotiation and compromise. The second one is peace as the ending of the occupation. And C is peace as separation between Israelis and Palestinians. So let's start with point 8. With point A. Before doing that, this is the logo of Peace Now that was designed by David Tartakover, a graphic artist, Israeli graphic artist. This and all the images that will follow have been published on the John Simons article and are available in the archive of Peace Now at Givat Chaviva. So, peace as a process of negotiation and compromise. There were two aspects of this activity. The official government negotiations on the one hand, and the dialogue that Peace Now maintained with the leaders of the Palestinians in the occupied territory. This was the first point was that Peace Now tried to put forward was that indeed the conflict between Israelis and Palestinians, as well as with other Arab nations, was it was possible to reach a compromise in these conflicts. And at the beginning already of the movement, the idea was that Peace Now, the idea of Peace Now was that the government should negotiate with whichever Palestinians adopted negotiation as the path to resolve the conflict. And this is the reason why there are two fronts in which Peace Now operated. Official government negotiations, so pressure and lobbying, and on the other hand, contacts with leaders of the Palestinians in the occupied territory. I remind you that Peace Now was not a pacifist organization, but a peace movement, and we've seen these differences at the beginning of our course. And Peace Now adhered to a pragmatic conception of peace, and therefore it pressured the government to bring home whatever positive results from whichever process and negotiations were on their agenda, and it did so by mobilizing public support for the negotiations. From the autumn of 1984, there were small groups of leaders from Peace Now that were busy meeting with representatives of the Palestinians in the occupied territories, making connections between them and Israelis, including labor politicians. And this was also framed as an effort to understand and acknowledge and learn each other's positions. And these dialogues that took place in the mid-1980s were to prove vital to the activities and to how Peace Now structured its activities during the first Intifada. So this as for point A, peace as a process of negotiation. It can be summarized as negotiation with whoever is available and pushing the government and labor politicians particularly to entertain and to establish links with Palestinians, whoever is ready to negotiate. We as Peace Now mobilize public support in favor of these activities. However, there was a second image, as we said, that was peace as ending the occupation. the end of the occupation was seen, first of all, as an end of settlement. And settlements, especially those belonging to the Gush Emunim, the right-wing settler movement, Gush Emunim, the Bloc of the Faithful, these were considered an obstacle of peace. I remind you that there is an article that you can find on Haaretz online, an interview to the late Yitzhak Rabin, who declared already in 1976 settlements are a cancer that will corrode the Israeli state. And I invite you to read this very brief interview, or maybe a page, that it's really very enlightening. So Peace Now, which certainly was very different from the Yitzhak Rabin of 1976, portrayed Gush Emunim, the Bloc of the Faithful, as extremists, and it portrayed itself as expressing the view of the center, of the mainstream. So in a way, it forced a little bit the image that of itself on the population, and by doing so, it also moved a little bit to the center of the political spectrum. And you will see how in the next slide. I remind you also that in section number 4, when we will be looking at religious peace movements, you will see that a number of religious individuals which did not belong to the right-wing settler movement, Gush Emunim, established a religious movement to counteract the strength of this right-wing movement and to prove the point that being Jews did not equal being settlers and oppressing another population, occupying their land and colonizing their resources. And these were called Netivot Shalom, and before them Oz V'Shalom. Oz V'Shalom was established in 1978 as well, I think, and it then merged in the 80s with Netivot Shalom, a second organization which was very much anti-settler. But just to give you an idea of the extent of the anti-settlement feeling among in Peace Now, this is a picture of Rabbi Levinger, one of the heads of the Gush Emunim, portrayed here on this red background with a gun in his hand, with the Hebrew words, "We shoot and we laugh," which is a clear reference to the saying, "We shoot and we cry." So this is clearly the opposite. I remind you that this picture comes from the Peace Now archive in Givat Chaviva, the Yad Ya'ari Institute, and was published in the article by John Simons. The anti-settlement feeling inside Peace Now at this time, and actually into the first Intifada in 1990, gave way to the Settlement Watch project, which is one of the strong points, if you want, of strong activities that Peace Now as an organization conducts even today. The idea at this point was to monitor the expansion and the activities of the settlements. And this led a little bit to conceive peace as ending the occupation, but by identifying with the Palestinian victims of the occupation, which was also conceived as a damage done to the Israeli morale, if you want. What this led to was a number of protests and demonstrations that in which certain keywords were used to link that particular demonstration to a particular event. The question of the moral cost of the occupation was one of the strong slogans, if you want, or the strong points, theoretical points of Peace Now. And this is something that returns over and over in the 1980s, before the Intifada and during the Intifada. And in fact, in 1987, Peace Now was one of the most vocal of the peace groups that protested the repressive military response to the uprising. There were two demonstrations that you can find in the previous slides where the charts are. One in December 1987, immediately after the starting of the Intifada, 10 days after, a small demonstration of about 1,500 individuals under the slogan, "Why are the terrorists burning?" And a much larger one a month later with about 80,000 people. And on both occasions, the flyers and the slogans and the pictures blamed the violence on the government's response, on the government's unwillingness to negotiate and compromise over the territories. However, there needed to be a compromise at some point, because as the Intifada became more radical and some attacks on civilians started to take place in the 1990s, peace could no longer be framed only through the buzzwords of the moral costs of the occupation or the need to negotiate and talk to whoever was available to talk. So a third framework emerged, which is peace as separation between Israelis and Palestinians, and this occurred, in fact, in the during the first Intifada, into a couple of years into it, and with the Gulf War starting in '91, it became even more obvious. This is the poster. להיפרד עכשיו לשלום, to separate now in peace, and this was this was the last, at least for the 1990s, keywords or campaign of Peace Now. The idea was to return inside the Green Line, to make Israel, the Israeli government, return inside the Green Line. And so, and this was done because Israelis were anyway blocking those who were wanted to come into Israel to work, those Palestinians that needed to come to Israel to work. And the idea of separation and therefore bringing to the fore the Green Line was connected to the establishment of an effective boundary between Israel and its neighbors. So there is a little bit of a contradiction here, because in a way it is at odds with the other two images of peace that we have seen. If negotiation and compromise would bring peace and security along with it, then why would the two peoples need to separate? And the image of separation also allowed for a perception of Palestinians as hostile to Israel, and therefore the idea that peace should be achieved through negotiation and compromise was also undermined, since separation can also be imposed unilaterally. Certainly, what remained was the principle of two states for the two peoples, and a territorial compromise that would base this separation, such, for example, as the dismantlement of Israeli settlements in the future Palestinian state. So this closes our section on Peace Now, and we will now move on to conscientious objection in Israel from the 1980s onwards, a battle which Peace Now did not embrace. And what we can certainly say is that Peace Now, trying to be as comprehensive as possible in the number of supporters it wanted to attract and maintain in its own ranks, also transmitted an ideological message which did not go very much into the details or technicalities of what it really meant to achieve peace now, with the exception of the settlement watch program, which, as I said, still goes on today. So this is the oldest peace movement, one of the oldest peace movements, mass peace movements in Israel. And I encourage you to go to the website and browse and look at their tours and look at their activities. I would say that one of the major criticisms that can be levied against this movement is maybe that by trying to expand membership as much as possible, as numerous as possible, it neglected the definition of certain priorities that therefore tended to shift, as we have seen, and sometimes to have contradictory messages. Nevertheless, it's a reference point for all peace movements in Israel. It has been and it continues to be. So if you feel like, follow me to the beginning of the 1980s, the First Lebanon War, and we will start our journey into the new movements for conscientious objection that developed in Israel from 1982 onwards. Thank you. Bye.